I'm Brooke Mitchell, 31 years old, and for most of my life, I've been known as the family disappointment. While my Harvard-educated sister saved lives as a neurosurgeon and my brother sold his tech startup for millions, I was the marketing coordinator my mother introduced with a sigh at family gatherings. My childhood was filled with backhanded compliments and not-so-subtle comparisons. That was until my portfolio manager Hannah called with news that would change everything. Before I tell you how my life completely changed, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If my story resonates with you at all, hit that subscribe button because trust me, what happens next shocked everyone in my family. Growing up in Wellesley, an affluent suburb west of Boston, meant living surrounded by achievement. Our neighborhood was filled with doctors, lawyers, and business executives who sent their children to prestigious private schools and expected nothing but excellence. In our family, that standard was set and enforced primarily by my mother, Diane Mitchell. My mother built her reputation as one of Boston's most formidable corporate lawyers. She graduated top of her class from Yale Law School, made partner at her firm by 32, and approached parenting with the same ruthless efficiency she brought to the courtroom. Everything in our household was a measurement of success: grades, extracurricular achievements, social connections, and eventually, career trajectories. My father, James, worked as a financial consultant. While successful in his own right, he always existed somewhat in my mother's shadow. He was the more nurturing parent, but rarely contradicted my mother's harsh assessments. "Your mother just wants what's best for you," he would say after particularly brutal criticism sessions, a phrase I grew to resent almost as much as my mother's direct condemnations. Then there were my siblings, the golden children. My sister Kimberly, for years older than me, seemed genetically programmed for success. She was reading chapter books by kindergarten, skipped second grade entirely, graduated high school as valedictorian, and breezed through Harvard before entering its medical school. Now at 35, she's a neurosurgeon specializing in pediatric cases, saving children's lives while my mother collects newspaper clippings about her accomplishments. My younger brother Brian, despite being only 29, had already outpaced both of us in my mother's estimation. A math prodigy who taught himself coding by age 12, he graduated from Princeton with dual degrees in computer science and business. He launched his first tech startup during his senior year and sold it 2 years later for a sum that mother made sure everyone in our extended family knew about. And then there was me, creative, sensitive, and perpetually falling short. I still remember the first time I heard the phrase family disappointment. I was 8 years old and had just participated in the regional math competition that Kimberly had won 3 years running. Mathematics wasn't my strong suit, but mother insisted I follow in my sister's footsteps. When I didn't even place in the top 20, she didn't comfort me. Instead, as we walked to the car, she gripped my shoulder and said to her friend Linda, "Well, I suppose every family has its disappointment." I pretended not to hear, but those words burrowed deep. School was always challenging for me, not because I lacked intelligence, but because my brain worked differently. While my siblings thrived in rigid academic environments, I struggled with standardized testing and memorization. My report cards were filled with BS and the occasional C, each one prompting a lengthy lecture about Mitchell family standards. Kimberly never brought home anything less than an A, mother would say, waving my report card like evidence in a trial. And Brian is already taking advanced placement classes. What are we going to do with you, Brooke? What I lacked in traditional academic prowess, I made up for in creativity. By middle school, I discovered a passion for art and digital design. My bedroom walls were covered with my paintings and sketches. My computer was filled with digital creations and early attempts at website design. When I brought home a first-place ribbon from the school art show, I thought finally I'd found something to make mother proud. "That's nice, dear," she said, barely glancing at my winning portrait. But art doesn't pay the bills, does it? Unless you're Picasso, and let's be realistic. The pattern continued throughout my teenage years. Every achievement of mine was minimized, while my siblings' accomplishments were celebrated extravagantly. Kimberly's acceptance to Harvard prompted a catered party with 50 guests. When Brian won the state science fair, Mother took out an announcement in the local paper. When I was selected for a competitive summer program in digital arts, Mother told relatives I was just going to computer camp. Family gatherings became showcases for my siblings' achievements and subtle reminders of my inadequacies. Thanksgiving dinners featured aunt after aunt asking Kimberly about her medical research or uncle after uncle discussing Brian's business ventures. When they finally turned to me with a polite, "And what about you, Brooke?" Mother would usually interject with, "Brooke is still finding her way," or "Brooke has always been our creative one," the subtext clear to everyone at the table. By high school graduation, I had internalized the narrative. I was the family disappointment, the one who would never measure up, the Mitchell who had somehow missed receiving the success gene. My self-esteem was in tatters, and worse, I believed I deserved the treatment I received because I had failed to meet the standards so effortlessly achieved by my siblings. What no one in my family seemed to notice or care about was how their constant comparisons and criticisms were crushing my spirit. The creative, enthusiastic child I had once been was replaced by a young woman filled with self-doubt and anxiety. Even my artistic pursuits, once my refuge, became sources of stress as I measured them against impossible standards. The saddest part? I started to believe them. I began to see myself through my mother's disappointed eyes, internalizing the idea that I was somehow fundamentally deficient. That belief would follow me into college and beyond, shaping decisions both large and small, until a single phone call would finally begin to break its power. The spring of my senior year of high school brought the next major installment in my family's disappointment saga, college acceptance letters. While Kimberly had been courted by every Ivy League school and Brian had received a full scholarship to Princeton, my applications yielded different results. Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. Mother's top choices all sent polite rejection letters. I was waitlisted at Cornell, but ultimately not accepted. The University of Massachusetts Boston, my safety school, welcomed me with open arms. When Mother saw the letter, her lips thinned to a barely visible line. "Well," she said, sliding the acceptance letter back across the kitchen counter, "I suppose UMass is fine for now. You can always transfer after a year when you've proven yourself. Just a phase." That night, I overheard her on the phone with her sister, my Aunt Patricia. "No, not the flagship campus, just Boston. It's practically a community college. I don't know what went wrong with Brooke. We gave her all the same advantages as the others." Despite Mother's dismissal, I found my undergraduate years surprisingly liberating. Away from the constant comparisons of home, I began to discover who I actually was rather than who I wasn't. The UMass Boston campus was diverse, with students from various backgrounds and life experiences. For once, I wasn't surrounded by carbon copies of my high-achieving siblings. During my sophomore year, I discovered my passion for digital marketing and multimedia design. The blend of creativity and strategic thinking suited my skills perfectly. I excelled in my marketing courses, making the dean's list for the first time. When I called home with the news, Mother's response was tepid. "That's nice, honey. Did you know Kimberly just co-authored a paper in the New England Journal of Medicine?" I declared my major in marketing with a minor in graphic design, choices Mother dismissed as playing on computers all day. When I tried explaining the growing importance of digital marketing in the business world, she cut me off. "Brooke, people in our family are doctors, lawyers, and entrepreneurs. They don't make pretty pictures for social media. But I suppose someone has to do those jobs too." By senior year, I had secured an internship at a boutique marketing agency in Boston, which led to a job offer upon graduation. The starting salary was modest, but respectable for an entry-level position in the field. At my graduation dinner, Mother managed what she probably thought was a compliment. "Well, at least you finished something," she said, raising her wine glass in a toast. "That shows perseverance. And marketing is practical, I suppose." My first few years in the workforce brought new opportunities for family judgment. At every holiday gathering, the same pattern emerged. Kimberly would discuss her latest surgical innovation. Brian would mention his growing company's valuation, and then attention would reluctantly turn to me. "Brooke is working at, what's the name of that little marketing company again, dear?" Mother would ask, though she knew perfectly well. "Apex Digital Solutions," I would answer. "Yes, that's it. She helps with their social media." The dismissive simplification of my role as a marketing coordinator was deliberate and cutting. The Thanksgiving dinner when I was 26 remains particularly vivid in my memory. Uncle Robert asked how everyone's careers were progressing, and Mother seized the opportunity for another public assessment. "Well, 2 out of 3 of my children turned out successful," she said with a laugh that others around the table awkwardly joined. "Kimberly just received a grant for her research, and Brian's company is opening a second office. Brooke is still at that marketing place." I sat there, pushing mashed potatoes around my plate, feeling like I was 8 years old again, failing that math competition. Later, when I confronted Mother in the kitchen about her comment, she seemed genuinely confused. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, Brooke. It was just a little joke. You know I'm proud of you for trying your best." The breaking point came at Mother's 60th birthday party. She had rented an elegant venue and invited over 100 guests, colleagues, friends, and family members from across the country. During her speech, she thanked her 2 successful children for organizing such a wonderful celebration, despite the fact that I had been the one who found the venue, designed the invitations, and coordinated with the caterer. As she accepted congratulations, I stood awkwardly holding the cake I had special ordered from her favorite bakery, invisible in plain sight. That night, I made a decision. I would limit my contact with my family to the bare minimum necessary to maintain civility. No more subjecting myself to constant judgment and comparisons. No more seeking approval that would never come. The following years were lonely but necessary. I attended obligatory holiday gatherings and occasional family dinners, but kept conversations superficial and visits brief. I declined weekend invitations and made excuses to miss informal get-togethers. The distance protected me from the worst of the criticism, but it also isolated me from any possibility of family support. During this period, my self-doubt reached its peak. Despite receiving promotions at work and positive feedback from clients, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fundamentally inadequate. I dated sporadically but sabotaged relationships before they became serious, convinced that anyone who truly got to know me would eventually see the disappointment my family saw. What my family didn't know was that during these years of apparent stagnation, I was quietly setting in motion a plan that would eventually change everything. A plan born from the desperate desire to prove them wrong once and for all. The seed for what I came to call my freedom plan was planted during a particularly difficult period at work. Our agency had taken on a new client, a financial services firm specializing in wealth management for young professionals. As the marketing coordinator assigned to their account, I spent hours immersed in their content, learning about investment strategies, compound interest, and the power of starting early. The concepts fascinated me, particularly the idea that modest but consistent investments could grow substantially over time. Unlike the get-rich-quick schemes that had made my brother a millionaire overnight, this was a path that suited my methodical nature and limited resources. Around this same time, I met Morgan Freeman, and yes, he'd heard every joke about sharing a name with a famous actor. Morgan was a new creative director at our agency, brought in to oversee the redesign of several major client websites. In his mid-40s, Morgan had an unusual background. He'd worked in finance for 15 years before making a career change to pursue his passion for digital design. We bonded during late nights at the office, finishing client presentations and troubleshooting website issues. When I mentioned my growing interest in personal finance, sparked by our wealth management client, Morgan became an unexpected mentor. "The thing about money," he told me over coffee one morning, "is that it's just a tool. Most people never learn how to use it properly. They either worship it or waste it. The smart ones make it work for them." Over the next few weeks, Morgan shared insights from his former career. He explained concepts that the wealth management content had only touched on. tax-advantaged accounts, dollar cost averaging, diversification beyond the basics. Most importantly, he introduced me to the concept of financial independence. What if, he asked one day, you could reach a point where working was a choice, not a necessity? Where your mother's opinion of your career couldn't hurt you because you didn't need her approval or anyone's to survive. The idea was revolutionary to me. I'd always seen money as something I needed to earn through work, not something that could eventually work for me. The possibility of financial autonomy represented something I desperately craved: freedom from judgment. With Morgan's guidance, I developed what we called my 5-year freedom plan. The first step was opening investment accounts, a 401k through work, a Roth IRA for tax-advantaged growth, and a standard brokerage account for additional investments. I had saved about $12,000 over my working years, not impressive by my family's standards, but a start. Morgan helped me research investment options that aligned with my risk tolerance and time horizon. Unlike my brother's high-risk ventures, I chose a more balanced approach: low-cost index funds for stable growth, a carefully selected handful of established companies with strong fundamentals, and just a small percentage allocated to higher-risk investments with greater growth potential. Think of it as a barbell strategy, Morgan explained. Most of your money is in solid, proven investments that will grow steadily over time. A small portion is in higher risk, higher reward opportunities. You don't need all of those to pay off, just one. To accelerate my savings rate, I made 2 significant life changes. First, I moved from my reasonably comfortable apartment to a tiny studio in a less desirable neighborhood, cutting my rent by nearly 40%. Second, I started a side hustle developing websites for small local businesses, using the skills I'd gained at work to earn extra income on evenings and weekends. My new lifestyle was Spartan by necessity. I sold my car and relied on public transportation. I cooked at home instead of eating out. I bought clothes secondhand or waited for significant sales. Every dollar saved went into my investment accounts, split according to the strategy Morgan and I had developed. When my mother saw my new apartment during a rare visit, her horror was evident. "Brooke, this is practically a closet. There isn't even room for a proper sofa. Is this really necessary? Your father and I could help if you're struggling this badly." I didn't tell her that my bank account balance was actually growing, not shrinking. I didn't explain that my budget lifestyle was a choice, not a result of failure. Instead, I simply said, "I'm comfortable here. It suits my needs." She left shaking her head, no doubt adding this to her mental list of my disappointments. Later that week, she sent me a check for $5,000 with a note saying, "For a better living situation." I deposited the check and put the entire amount into my investment accounts. My siblings were equally dismissive of my lifestyle choices. Brian, flush with cash from his successful startup, couldn't understand why I lived so frugally. "You need to take more risks, Brooke," he advised during one of our infrequent phone calls. "Playing it safe in a marketing job is fine, but you'll never get ahead that way. You should let me invest some money for you." Kimberly, to her credit, was less judgmental but equally misguided. "I worry about you," she said. "All work and no play. When's the last time you took a vacation or bought yourself something nice? Life isn't just about saving pennies." What none of them knew was that I had a regular standing appointment with Hannah Watson, a portfolio manager at the investment firm I'd opened my accounts with. Every quarter, Hannah and I would review my portfolio performance, make adjustments as needed, and update my investment strategy based on market conditions and my growing knowledge. Hannah became something of a confidant, one of the few people who knew the full extent of my financial activities. She understood my motivation. Not just building wealth, but claiming independence, and respected my methodical approach. Most clients your age either ignore their investments entirely or check them obsessively, making emotional decisions, she told me during one of our meetings. "Your consistency is remarkable." 3 years into my 5-year plan, my portfolio had grown substantially. The bull market had certainly helped, but my disciplined approach and diverse investments were the real factors in my success. One particular investment, $5, 000 placed in a promising AI education startup that Morgan had heard about through his network, was showing especially impressive gains as the company expanded rapidly. Through it all, I maintained absolute secrecy about my growing net worth. At family gatherings, I continued to be the marketing coordinator with a tiny apartment and modest lifestyle. I endured the pitying looks and backhanded compliments. I listened as Mother introduced Kimberly and Brian to her friends with pride and me as an afterthought. The Freedom Plan had become my secret strength. Each dismissive comment or comparative slight now bounced off a growing shield of financial confidence. I wasn't just saving and investing money, I was buying myself options, creating choices my family didn't know existed. Then came the Monday morning that changed everything. It started as a typical Monday. I woke at 5:30 a.m., completed my morning workout, and prepared for the day ahead. The weekend had included a mandatory family dinner celebrating Brian's latest business venture, a new app that had secured significant second-round funding. The evening had featured the usual parade of my siblings' accomplishments and subtle digs at my career stagnation. As I stirred almond milk into my coffee, I was already mentally preparing for a busy workday. We were launching a major campaign for a new client, and I had a presentation to finalize before the 10 a.m. meeting. I was reviewing my notes when my phone rang. The screen displayed Hannah Watson's name, which was unusual. Our quarterly meeting wasn't scheduled for another 3 weeks. "Hannah, good morning," I answered, immediately concerned. "Is everything okay?" "Brooke, I'm glad I caught you before work." Hannah's voice had an unusual quality, controlled excitement. "Do you have a minute to talk? This isn't something that should wait." My stomach tightened. Despite the overall growth of my portfolio, I'd always feared a market crash or some catastrophic investment failure would derail my carefully constructed plan. "What's wrong? Has something happened to my accounts?" "Nothing's wrong," Hannah replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Actually, something's very right. You remember that education technology startup you invested in about 2 years ago? EDUI. Of course. It had been one of my higher-risk investments, based on Morgan's recommendation. I'd put $5,000 into the company when they were still in early growth stages. They're being acquired. The deal was just announced internally to shareholders before the public release later today. Google is buying them for their adaptive learning algorithm. That's good news? I wasn't sure why this warranted an early morning call. "Brooke, it's exceptional news. Based on the acquisition price, your $5,000 investment is now worth approximately $457,000. And that's just the cash portion. There's also a stock component that could increase the value further depending on Google's share price at closing." My coffee mug slipped from my hand, splashing hot liquid across the kitchen counter. I barely noticed. $457,000? My voice sounded distant, as though someone else was speaking. "That can't be right." "I triple-checked the figures before calling you," Hannah said. "With this windfall, combined with your other investments, your total portfolio value has just crossed the 7-figure mark. Brooke, you're officially a millionaire." I sank onto a kitchen stool, my legs suddenly unable to support me. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter. "I need to see the numbers," I managed to say. "This doesn't seem real." "I'm sending you the detailed breakdown right now," Hannah replied. "You'll need to sign some paperwork regarding the acquisition. There are tax implications we should discuss, and we'll want to develop a strategy for reinvesting the proceeds." "But Brooke, take a moment to let this sink in. This is the result of your consistent discipline and willingness to take calculated risks." After hanging up, I sat motionless in my tiny kitchen, surrounded by second-hand furniture in an apartment my mother deemed barely habitable, trying to process what had just happened. The notification sound from my phone jolted me back to reality. Hannah's email contained the confirmation I needed: spreadsheets, official documentation, and a personal note of congratulations. The numbers were real. My net worth, previously hovering around $200,000 after 3 years of aggressive saving and fortunate market timing, had quintupled overnight. My first call was to Morgan. Despite having moved to a different agency the previous year, He remained my trusted advisor and one of the few people who knew about my freedom plan. "Holy shit, Brooke," he exclaimed after I shared the news. "I knew I had potential, but this is beyond what anyone expected. We need to celebrate. Dinner tonight, my treat. Anywhere you want." Through my shock, a question formed. What do I do now, Morgan? I wasn't expecting to reach my financial goals for at least another few years. "That's the beautiful part," he said. "You get to decide. Your original plan has accelerated, but the principles remain the same. Financial independence means choice. What do you want to do with this freedom?" What did I want? The question reverberated through my mind as I somehow made it through my workday, functioning on autopilot while internally processing my new reality. I sat through the client presentation, responded to emails, and attended a team lunch, all while carrying a secret that felt too enormous to contain. That evening, over dinner at a restaurant far nicer than my budget usually allowed, Morgan and I discussed practical next steps. Setting up meetings with a tax professional, considering more diversified investment strategies for the windfall, and exploring the possibility of purchasing a home instead of renting. "What about your family?" Morgan asked as we finished dessert. "Are you going to tell them?" The question struck at the heart of my uncertainty. Part of me wanted to rush to my mother's house and lay out bank statements and portfolio summaries on her perfectly polished dining table. "See? I'm not a disappointment after all. I've achieved something even Brian hasn't: financial independence before 35. But another part, perhaps the wiser part, recognized that financial validation wasn't the same as emotional healing. Would my mother's approval, finally earned through monetary success, actually fill the void her lifelong disappointment had created? Or would it simply reinforce the toxic idea that my worth was measured by financial metrics? "Not yet," I finally answered. "I need time to process this myself before dealing with their reactions." In the days that followed, I met with Hannah and other financial professionals to ensure my sudden wealth was properly managed. I began researching condominium options in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, not to impress anyone, but because I genuinely liked the area and wanted the stability of owning my home. At work, I maintained my normal routine, though with a newfound sense of calm. The constant anxiety about measuring up, about proving myself, had been replaced by something unfamiliar: confidence. Not arrogance, but the quiet certainty that I had options. I could stay in my current position because I chose to, not because I had no alternatives. For nearly 3 weeks, I kept my financial transformation completely private, telling no one besides Morgan and my financial advisors. I wanted to experience this new reality on my own terms before subjecting it to my family's judgment. Then came another family dinner invitation, this one impossible to decline. My mother had reserved a table at Sorellina, one of Boston's most exclusive Italian restaurants, to celebrate Brian's latest business success. The text message made her expectations clear: dinner at Sorellina this Saturday at 7 p.m. to celebrate Brian's new funding round. Business attire. Everyone will be there. No excuses. I knew then that the time for privacy had ended. The family dinner would be the setting for my revelation, whether I was fully prepared or not. Sorellina gleamed with understated luxury, all dark wood, crisp white tablecloths, and soft lighting that flattered its well-heeled clientele. My mother had requested a private dining area, ensuring our family drama would play out with appropriate exclusivity. I arrived precisely on time, having spent considerable effort on my appearance. Not in the designer dress mother would have preferred, but in a well-cut black pantsuit that projected confidence and professionalism. My hair was styled simply, my makeup minimal but precise. I looked competent, successful even, though not in the ostentatious way my mother might have wanted. The maitre d' led me to our table where my family was already assembled: mother and father, Kimberly and her neurosurgeon husband Thomas, Brian and his girlfriend Allison, who worked in venture capital. Mother's expression upon seeing me was its usual mixture of mild disappointment and resignation. "Brooke, darling, you made it," she said, rising for the perfunctory cheek kiss. "We were just discussing Brian's latest triumph. The Weinstein Fund has contributed to his Series B funding. $20 million. Isn't that remarkable?" Congratulations, Brian, I said, taking the only remaining seat at the far end of the table, naturally. That's impressive. Brian launched into a detailed explanation of his company's valuation metrics and growth projections, terminology deliberately technical to emphasize the sophistication of his business acumen. Mother watched him with undisguised pride, occasionally adding commentary like, "Brian always had an eye for opportunity," or "We knew from his first computer programming class that he was destined for tech success." The waiter arrived to take our orders, momentarily pausing the Brian appreciation ceremony. After selecting our meals and a wine that Mother deemed acceptable, the conversation shifted briefly to Kimberly's recent publication in a prestigious medical journal. "They're considering her for the Lasker Award," Mother informed the table, though this was clearly not news to anyone but me. "The youngest nominee in the category's history." "Not quite the youngest," Kimberly corrected with practiced modesty, "but certainly among them." Father, who had remained largely silent as was his custom, made a brief attempt at inclusion. "And how are things with you, Brooke? Anything new at work?" Before I could answer, Mother interjected, "Brooke received a promotion recently, didn't you, dear?" "What was the title again?" "Senior Marketing Strategist," I replied, knowing full well she remembered, but chose to minimize it. "Yes, that's it. Moving up the ladder at your little agency." "That's nice." The dismissive tone was familiar, but for once, it didn't sting. The knowledge of what was in my investment accounts provided an invisible shield against her judgment. Brian, never one to miss an opportunity for condescension masked as helpfulness, leaned across the table. "You know, Brooke, I could always find something for you at my company. Our marketing team is expanding, and with your experience, limited as it may be to smaller clients, you might fit in somewhere on the team. Entry-level positions can be stepping stones." "Entry-level," I repeated, an unexpected laugh escaping me. "Brian, I've been in the industry for nearly a decade." "Yes, but corporate marketing for a tech startup is a different animal," he explained with the patronizing tone he reserved for those he deemed less business-savvy. "The pace, the stakes, it's not like running social media campaigns for local businesses." I took a sip of water, using the moment to decide. This was it, the opening I needed. The perfect segue had presented itself, and I could feel Morgan's encouraging presence in my mind. "Own your success, Brooke. You've earned it." "Actually," I said, setting my glass down deliberately, "I've been thinking about making a career change." This caught everyone's attention. Mother's eyebrows rose fractionally, the most surprised she would allow her Botox to display. "Oh," she said. "Finally reconsidering law school?" "I always said it wasn't too late." "Not law school," I replied. "I'm considering starting my own digital marketing consultancy, focusing on helping small to mid-sized businesses develop comprehensive online strategies. There's a significant market gap there." The table fell silent for a beat too long. Mother recovered first. "Brooke, darling, starting a business requires capital, experience with high-level clients, and, frankly, a certain business acumen." She glanced at Brian as she emphasized the last point. "Perhaps in a few more years, after you've saved and gained more experience." "I have the capital," I stated simply. Father frowned. "Did you take out a loan?" "Brooke, in this economic climate, no loans," I interrupted gently. "I've been investing for the past 3 years. Quite successfully, as it happens." Brian's interest was piqued. Investments were his territory. "What sort of investments?" "Not those micro-investing apps, I hope. They're basically toys, not serious financial tools. A diversified portfolio. Index funds, established growth companies, and a few strategic early-stage investments in promising startups." I maintained eye contact with him as I continued. "One of which was just acquired by Google. My initial $5,000 investment is now worth over $450,000. The silence that followed was profound. Mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. Father's fork clattered against his plate. Kimberly's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Brian recovered first, skepticism evident in his tone. "That's a nearly 100 times return. That kind of multiple is extremely rare, even in venture capital." "I'm aware," I replied, unable to keep a slight smile from forming. I was fortunate. But it wasn't just luck. I researched thoroughly and took a calculated risk based on solid fundamentals and growth metrics. "Brooke," Mother said, her voice carrying a warning tone that suggested I might be exaggerating, "are you certain about these figures? Investment returns can be complicated to calculate correctly." Rather than argue, I reached for my phone, opened my portfolio app, and slid it across the table to her. "See for yourself. That's just the brokerage account. There's also my Roth IRA and 401k, which bring my total portfolio value to just over $1.2 million. Mother stared at the screen, color draining from her face as she processed the numbers. Father leaned over to look, his expression shifting from doubt to astonishment. "My God, Brooke," he whispered. "This is extraordinary." Mother passed the phone to Brian, who scrutinized it with the intensity of someone searching for evidence of fraud. Finding none, he handed it back to me, his expression unreadable. "Well," Mother said finally, reaching for her usual control, "I suppose you always had your father's head for numbers. It must have just taken longer to manifest in you than in Brian." The familiar attempt to rewrite history, to claim my success as somehow resulting from family traits rather than my own efforts, despite their discouragement, might once have infuriated me. Now, it merely amused me. Before I could respond, Father did something unprecedented. He contradicted Mother. "No, Diane," he said firmly. "Brooke did this entirely on her own. We never encouraged her financial interests. In fact, you especially, dismissed them. This success belongs to Brooke alone, and I for one am incredibly proud of her initiative." The table fell silent again. Father rarely challenged Mother, particularly in public. His doing so now, in defense of my accomplishments, felt like its own kind of vindication. Kimberly was the first to break the tension. "Brooke, this is amazing," she said, and her smile seemed genuinely warm. "I had no idea you were so involved in investing. You must have been living on practically nothing to save enough for this kind of portfolio growth." "That tiny apartment," Mother murmured, realization dawning. "The modest wardrobe. You weren't struggling, you were saving." "Strategic frugality," I confirmed. "Every dollar I didn't spend went into my investment accounts." Brian's competitive nature couldn't stay subdued for long. "Which other startups did you invest in? What was your selection methodology? Did you use a specific valuation model?" The barrage of questions was his way of reclaiming expert status, of re-establishing the hierarchy where he was the financial genius of the family. I answered simply, without the jargon he expected, which seemed to frustrate him further. The remainder of dinner passed in a surreal haze. Mother was uncharacteristically quiet, processing the shift in family dynamics. Father asked thoughtful questions about my investment strategy and business plans. Kimberly seemed genuinely interested in my experiences. Only Brian maintained a competitive edge, repeatedly mentioning that his company's valuation made him worth considerably more on paper. As we prepared to leave, Mother pulled me aside near the coat check. "Why didn't you tell us, Brooke? All this time we thought that I was the family disappointment." I finished for her. "Yes, I know exactly what you thought. What you told everyone to think." "That's not fair," she protested, but weakly. "We only wanted what was best for you." "No," I corrected gently, "you wanted me to be what was best for you. There's a difference." I collected my coat and headed for the door, a curious mixture of emotions swirling within me. The validation I'd imagined felt hollow compared to the realization that financial success hadn't magically healed the wounds of years of emotional neglect. Yet there was also a strange sense of closure. I'd finally proven myself on terms my family understood, even if those weren't the terms that mattered most to me anymore. Driving home to my soon-to-be former tiny apartment, I felt neither triumphant nor bitter. Instead, I experienced something unexpected: compassion. For my younger self who had internalized so much undeserved shame, for my father who had finally found his voice, even for my mother whose rigid definitions of success had limited her ability to appreciate her own daughter. The confrontation was over, but the real work of redefining my relationship with my family was just beginning. The aftermath of the Soralina revelation was immediate and overwhelming. My phone began buzzing with notifications before I even reached my apartment, text messages, emails, and voicemails from family members processing the shift in our established dynamic. Mother's approach was predictably practical, bypassing any acknowledgement of past criticism to focus on future opportunities. I've set up a lunch with Harold Weinstein. He's one of the top financial advisors in Boston. Tuesday at 1 p.m. at the Harbor Club. Don't be late. I declined politely but firmly. Thank you, but I already have a financial team I trust. I'm not looking for new advisors at this time. Her response came quickly. Harold manages portfolios 10 times the size of yours. He can take you to the next level. My current advisors have helped me achieve exceptional returns. I'm comfortable with our relationship. This pattern continued for days. Mother attempting to insert herself into my financial decisions, me establishing boundaries she'd never before encountered from me. It was clear she was struggling to reconcile her long-held view of me as the family disappointment with this new evidence of my success in an arena she respected. Kimberly's approach was markedly different. Her first message was simple: I owe you an apology. Coffee this week? We met at a quiet cafe near Massachusetts General Hospital during her break between surgeries. Unlike our usual interactions, which followed Mother's template of Kimberly sharing her achievements while I listened admiringly, this conversation had a different tenor from the start. I've been thinking about how I've treated you, she said after we'd settled with our drinks. Not just recently, but over the years. I never challenged Mother's narrative about you, even when I could see how much it hurt you. I was complicit in that, and I'm truly sorry. Her candor surprised me. You were the golden child, I said. It was a comfortable position. Comfortable but constraining, she admitted. Do you know how terrified I've always been of failure? One wrong move, one failed surgery, one misdiagnosis, and I'd lose the only identity I've ever had, the successful daughter. At least you got to discover who you really are outside of Mother's expectations. This perspective shift, seeing my struggle as something that had ultimately benefited me while her apparent advantage had its own costs, was revelatory. Over the next hour, Kimberly and I began rebuilding our relationship on more equal footing, sharing vulnerabilities and hopes in a way we never had as children. Brian's reaction followed a different trajectory. Initially defensive and competitive, my company's valuation is still higher than your portfolio. He gradually shifted to treating me as a potential business resource. We should discuss co-investment opportunities, he suggested during one of his increasingly frequent calls. I have access to deals you wouldn't see otherwise. While I maintained a polite relationship with Brian, I was careful to keep our financial discussions limited. His need to position himself as the more successful sibling hadn't diminished. It had merely adapted to acknowledge me as competition rather than an afterthought. Father's response was the most surprising and touching. He called me the day after the dinner, his voice carrying an emotion I rarely heard from him. I failed you, Brooke, he said without preamble. I should have stood up for you years ago. I let your mother's intensity dictate how we treated you, and that was wrong. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished, but more importantly, I'm proud of who you are, your resilience, your determination, your integrity. Why now, Dad? I asked, the question that had lingered for years. Why didn't you ever say anything before? His sigh carried decades of regret. The path of least resistance becomes a habit. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but really, I was just avoiding conflict. Watching you stand your ground last night made me realize how much courage I've lacked all these years. This conversation marked the beginning of a genuine relationship with my father, separate from Mother's influence. We began meeting for breakfast every other week, catching up on each other's lives and slowly rebuilding the trust that had been damaged by his years of passive enabling. As my family recalibrated to my new status, I focused on implementing the plans I'd been developing. I gave notice at my agency, explaining that I was starting my own consultancy. My colleagues were surprised but supportive, and my boss even became my first client, contracting my new company to handle projects their team was too busy to manage. I purchased a condominium in Back Bay, Not the largest or most expensive in the building, but a space that felt both comfortable and reflective of my success. The two-bedroom unit with large windows and a small balcony overlooking the neighborhood was a far cry from my tiny rental, but I furnished it thoughtfully rather than ostentatiously, creating a home rather than a showcase. Mother insisted on visiting shortly after I moved in. She arrived with a housewarming gift, an expensive crystal vase that suited her taste more than mine, and immediately began assessing the property with the critical eye I'd grown up dreading. "The finishes are nice, though I would have chosen marble for the countertops instead of quartz," she noted, running a finger along the kitchen island. "And this living room could accommodate a larger sofa. You have the space now, you should use it." As she continued her evaluation, I felt old patterns threatening to re-emerge, her judgment, my defensive justification, followed by my inevitable feeling of inadequacy. But something had fundamentally changed. The financial security I'd built had translated into emotional security I'd never before possessed. "Mom," I said, interrupting her critique of my lighting fixtures, "I need to say something." She paused, looking mildly surprised at my interruption. "For most of my life, you've made me feel like I wasn't enough," I continued, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. "Not smart enough, not successful enough, not accomplished enough. Always the disappointment compared to Kimberly and Brian." "Brooke, that's not, please let me finish. This isn't about my investment success or this apartment or my new business. It's about the fact that your approval has always been conditional on achievements you deemed worthy. Do you know how damaging that is to a child? To grow up believing your parents' love depends on your accomplishments?" Mother sat down heavily on my allegedly too small sofa, her expression a mixture of defensiveness and genuine confusion. "I've always wanted what's best for you. Everything I did was to push you to reach your potential. No, you wanted me to reach the potential you defined for me. But I'm not Kimberly or Brian. I'm me with different strengths, different interests, different measures of success." "I never meant to hurt you," she said, though her tone suggested she still didn't fully understand my point. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished now." "That's just it," I replied. "You're proud now that I've succeeded financially. But I needed you to be proud of me all along for my creativity, my resilience, my kindness. For who I am, not what I achieve." The conversation that followed was difficult, with Mother alternating between defensiveness, "We gave you every advantage," and revisionism, "I always believed in you in my own way." She wasn't ready to fully acknowledge her role in my emotional struggles, but it was the first time we'd ever had such an honest exchange about our relationship. As she was leaving, she paused at the door. "I may not have always shown it properly, Brooke, but I do love you. I always have." It wasn't the full recognition I might have wanted, but it was a start. A small crack in the foundation of our dysfunctional dynamic that might eventually allow something healthier to grow. The months that followed brought significant changes. My consultancy, Mitchell Digital Strategies, grew rapidly as word spread about my innovative approach to helping smaller businesses compete effectively online. I hired 2 employees within the first 6 months and was considering bringing on more to handle our expanding client list. But beyond professional success, I experienced personal growth that was even more meaningful. Working with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, I began to untangle the complex web of beliefs about myself that had formed during my years as the disappointment. I learned to recognize my intrinsic worth separate from external validation and to set healthy boundaries with family members. I also discovered a renewed passion for the creative pursuits I'd abandoned under Mother's criticism. I took painting classes at the Museum of Fine Arts, finding joy in the process rather than worrying about the result. I joined a writing group that met weekly to share and critique each other's work. These activities nourished parts of myself that had been neglected for too long. Perhaps most significantly, I began mentoring young professionals from disadvantaged backgrounds who were interested in marketing and digital media. Remembering how Morgan had guided me when I needed direction, I wanted to provide similar support to others facing obstacles. This led to establishing a small scholarship fund for creative arts students at UMass Boston, my alma mater that Mother had once dismissed as practically a community college. As my business grew and my personal life flourished, family dynamics continued to evolve. Kimberly and I developed a genuine friendship, meeting regularly for dinner or weekend outings that had nothing to do with family obligations. Father became more assertive in standing up to Mother, not just regarding me but in expressing his own preferences and opinions after decades of acquiescence. Brian remained Brian, competitive and status-conscious. But even he seemed to be maturing somewhat, occasionally asking for my perspective on marketing strategies for his company without immediately dismissing my suggestions. And Mother was trying in her way. She still lapsed into old patterns of criticism and comparison, but now caught herself more often. Our relationship remained complicated, but the emotional charge had diminished. I no longer sought her approval with the desperation of a child starved for validation. I could appreciate her strengths while acknowledging her limitations, including her limited capacity for the unconditional love I had craved growing up. Nearly a year after the revelatory dinner at Soralina, Mother hosted a family gathering at her home. As we sat around the dining table, the same table where I had endured countless uncomfortable meals, she did something unprecedented. "I'd like to say something," she announced after dinner had been served. "I've been reflecting on our family dynamics, particularly how I've interacted with each of you." She looked directly at me. "Especially you, Brooke. I realize now that I've been unfair in many ways, measuring your success against a very narrow standard. Your path has been different, but no less valid or impressive." The table fell silent. This public acknowledgement from Mother, who never admitted fault, was extraordinary. "I'm proud of all three of my children," she continued. "Not because of your careers or accomplishments, though those are certainly noteworthy, but because of who you are as people. I haven't always expressed that well, and for that, I apologize." Tears pricked at my eyes, not from the residual pain of past disappointments, but from the recognition that people, even someone as seemingly immutable as my mother, could grow and change. Her acknowledgement wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase years of hurt, but it represented a shift I had never thought possible. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. My financial windfall had been the catalyst for change, but the true transformation had been internal, redefining success on my own terms, healing old wounds, and building a life that reflected my authentic self rather than someone else's expectations. The family disappointment had disappeared, not because I had finally measured up to arbitrary standards, but because I had outgrown the need for external validation altogether. In its place stood a woman who understood that the most meaningful success wasn't measured in dollars or status, but in self-acceptance, purpose, and genuine connection. It's been just over a year since my portfolio manager made that life-changing call, and sometimes I still wake up wondering if it was all a dream. Not the financial part, my thriving consultancy and comfortable Back Bay condo are tangible reminders of that reality. What occasionally seems surreal is the transformation in my family relationships and, more importantly, in how I view myself. Mitchell Digital Strategies has grown beyond my initial projections. We now employ 10 people. A mix of strategists, designers, and content specialists, and have moved from my home office to a proper workspace in the South End. Our client list includes businesses ranging from local restaurants to regional healthcare providers, all benefiting from our specialized approach to digital marketing for mid-sized organizations. What gives me the most satisfaction isn't the company's profitability, though that's certainly pleasant, but the culture we've created. Unlike the cutthroat, achievement-at-all-costs environment I grew up in, our team celebrates collaboration, creativity, and work-life balance. We measure success not just in metrics and conversions, but in client relationships and employee satisfaction. My personal relationships have undergone equally significant evolutions. Kimberly and I now have standing dinner dates twice a month, conversations that range from professional challenges to childhood memories to current events. Without Mother's comparative framework constantly positioning us as competitors, we've discovered a genuine sisterly bond that had been suppressed for decades. "I always wanted to be closer to you growing up," she confessed during one of our dinners. But I was afraid if I didn't maintain my perfect daughter status, I'd end up on the receiving end of the criticism you faced. It was easier to stay in my lane and play my assigned role. We were both trapped in Mother's narrative, I replied. Just in different ways. Our relationship now includes not just emotional support, but practical collaboration. Kimberly has introduced me to medical professionals needing marketing services, while I've helped her develop a more engaging online presence for her research foundation. Father has undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. After decades of deferring to Mother, he's found his voice not just in defending me, but in expressing his own preferences and interests. He's taken up woodworking, a hobby Mother previously dismissed as messy and pointless, and has begun reconnecting with old friends Mother had deemed not our sort of people. During one of our breakfast meetings, he shared a revelation. I was so focused on providing financially that I forgot to provide emotionally, especially for you, Brooke. I thought if I kept the peace with your mother and maintained our lifestyle, I was doing my job as a father. I missed what you really needed. Which was? I asked, though I knew the answer. An advocate. Someone to see you for who you really were, not who your mother wanted you to be. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. I can't get those years back, but I'm trying to make up for it now. Brian remains the family member with whom I have the most complicated relationship. His competitive nature hasn't fundamentally changed, though he's learned to be less overt about it since Mother's public recalibration of family dynamics. We maintain a cordial relationship, speaking at family gatherings and occasionally consulting on business matters, but without the deeper connection I've established with Kimberly and Father. And Mother. Mother continues to surprise me. Progress isn't linear, and she still occasionally slips into old habits of criticism or comparison, but she catches herself more quickly now. Our relationship has developed a new foundation based on mutual respect rather than her judgment and my desperate need for approval. The most unexpected moment in our evolving relationship came during a garden party she hosted for her social circle, events that had once been showcases for my siblings' achievements and tacit reminders of my inadequacies. As guests mingled on the terrace, Mother clinked her glass for attention. I want to thank everyone for coming today, she began with her usual polished charm. And I especially want to acknowledge my daughter Brooke, who recently received the Boston Business Journal's 40 Under 40 recognition for her innovative work in digital marketing. Heads turned toward me, and I felt a momentary flash of the old anxiety, being put on display, measured, potentially found wanting. But Mother continued in a tone I'd rarely heard from her. What makes me proudest isn't the award itself, though that's certainly impressive. It's the way Brooke has built her business with integrity, creativity, and genuine concern for her clients and employees. She's created success on her own terms, which takes courage I'm not sure I would have had at her age. The acknowledgement wasn't just of my professional accomplishments, but of the values underlying them. A recognition that my different approach to success had merit on its own terms, not just because it had ultimately led to financial rewards. It was the closest Mother had ever come to saying, "I was wrong about you all along." Later, when I thanked her for the unexpected praise, she said something that suggested genuine growth. "I'm learning, Brooke. Slowly, perhaps, but I'm learning." Beyond family healing, this year has brought personal rediscovery. I've reconnected with passions abandoned years ago under the weight of criticism and comparison. My condo now includes a small studio space where I paint, not for exhibitions or acclaim, but for the pure joy of creation. I've joined a community theater group, rediscovering the love of performance I'd set aside after Mother deemed drama club a distraction from serious academics. These creative pursuits nourish something essential in me that had been starved for too long. There's a particular pleasure in engaging in activities with no metric for success beyond my own enjoyment and growth, a concept that would have been incomprehensible to the achievement-oriented family I grew up in. Perhaps the most meaningful aspect of my transformation has been the opportunity to help others. Remembering how Morgan's mentorship changed my trajectory, I've established a formal mentoring program for marketing students from underprivileged backgrounds. The Mitchell Creative Scholarship now supports 5 UMass Boston students annually, providing not just financial assistance, but professional guidance and internship opportunities. During a recent mentoring session with Jasmine, a first-generation college student with extraordinary design talent but limited professional connections, I recognized my younger self in her mixture of ambition and uncertainty. "I'm worried I won't measure up," she confessed. "Everyone else seems to know exactly what they're doing, and I'm just figuring it out as I go. Can I tell you a secret?" I replied. "Everyone is figuring it out as they go. Success isn't about knowing all the answers or never making mistakes. It's about learning from those mistakes and staying true to your own definition of what matters." In that moment, I realized how far I'd come from the young woman who believed she was fundamentally inadequate because she couldn't meet someone else's arbitrary standards. The greatest investment I'd made wasn't financial, but emotional, investing in my own self-worth and authentic path. Financial independence gave me options, but emotional independence gave me freedom. Freedom from the crushing weight of others' expectations, freedom to define success on my own terms, freedom to live a life aligned with my values rather than someone else's vision. The family disappointment no longer exists, not because I finally measured up, but because I finally understood that the measuring stick itself was flawed. True success isn't counted in dollars, degrees, or status symbols. It's measured in authenticity, purpose, and connection. It's found in the courage to chart your own course, even when others question your direction. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like you're not enough, or that you're being measured by standards that don't reflect who you truly are, I hope you'll take this to heart. You are not a disappointment. Your path doesn't need to mirror anyone else's to have value. Your worth isn't determined by achievements that can be listed on a resume or displayed on a mantle. The most important approval you'll ever receive is your own. And that, more than any portfolio value or business success, is what I'm most grateful to have finally discovered. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt pressured to meet someone else's definition of success? How did you break free and find your own path? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story touched you in any way, please hit that subscribe button. Let's build a community where we can all define success on our own terms. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, the most valuable asset you'll ever have is belief in yourself.